Welcome to the Acadec Coach's Playbook from the Texas Academic Decathlon. I'm Jared Stewart, and I'm here with Dax Nesossi, who is the coach at Paetow High School in Katy. He has been a coach for the past 6 years. Welcome, Dax.
Thank you so much, Jared. Glad to be here.
This is our third episode focused on the first part of the year as we try to build our teams and kind of get everything organized. It's always difficult as a coach because you're balancing your classroom duties and trying to get everything organized there, but you've also got this team that you're building as well. So Dax, what is your approach to building a team? How do you go about doing that? What does that look like?
I think one of the challenging things initially before we get to having a competition team of 9 is getting kids into the class to begin with. Starting the program at Paetow 2 years ago was somewhat challenging because the campus was unaware of even what is an Acadec, right? What is a academic decathlon? They kind of talked about it in these weird abstractions. Some equated it to Quiz Bowl. Some even thought it might have been UIL academics. And so while we used some of those as tools to give them an idea of what it might be like, but we began by really talking about the idea of studying one particular topic throughout the year. And for competition purposes, we hung banners around the school. We had informational meetings during our bell schedule where we have an advisory where students after third period can go to various club meetings. We walked around to various classes to kind of pump up the excitement for the potential of an academic decathlon team. And then I really sent out an email to all of our teachers, and many of the coaches, at least some of the veteran coaches will appreciate this. I said, do you have an incredibly smart but lazy student in your classroom? And if so, send them our way, because as we all know, in the Acadec world, honors are a dime a dozen. Scholastic, pretty plentiful in a campus, but your varsity is where the magic is at, the needle in the haystacks. And so I was really focusing on getting a varsity contingent together to build that up. And so it was interesting when I sent that email out to teachers, how many responses I did get on you have these kids that are incredibly smart, very engaged in the class, but just don't turn in any work. And that's our varsity kid. So I would go around during my conference period, pull kids out of class, and I'll say, hey, you don't know who I am. I don't know who you are, but you come highly regarded from your fellow teachers. And the students, at least my experience of in that recruiting standpoint, they lit up. We're very excited to see, wow, I'm on the radar of somebody for something other than performing low in the classroom. So we've done a really good job of kind of building up that varsity and keeping that spark lit. And then once we've gotten those students in the class per se for the upcoming year, we would set a schedule up during the summer of working through some content, getting the basically what is Acadec 101, and then just kind of your general run-of-the-mill team building activities. We don't really engage most of these because our team at this point comprises mostly juniors and seniors. We are bringing in some of our freshmen and sophomores in this upcoming year. So we don't find ourselves really doing some of these kind of pre-prescribed icebreakers and cheesy activities where we all like hold a rope and do tug of war. And that might work for some teams, but it really just is more organic in nature, where we just really ran around kind of in a big circle and had some conversations, got to know each other a little bit more. We'd break off into different groups and start working early in some of that content. And so I think what occurred naturally was this idea of not necessarily a strong team being built initially, but those small cohorts within the larger class helping each other and building. And it wasn't until last year specifically that we went to our very first invitational. I don't know what it is about for the first time a team or these kids going to an invitational. We were at Morton Ranch here in Katy at that invitational, but when they saw the other schools with the shirts and they saw the clock ticking on the big screen and the pencils down or the clickers down and coming and running in to look at their scores, there was this kind of undescribable magical experience, for lack of better terms, where they thought now they're hungry for this. They want to compete. They want to do this. And so it wasn't up until that point, building the team was a bit challenging because everything we were doing was talking about, hey, when we get to competition, when we get to here, when we get to regionals, when we hopefully go to state. And then having moved that group through that process in that very first year last year of going to regionals and then having the fortunate opportunity of not just going to regionals, but winning the 5A regionals as a brand new team and then advancing to state. They were on fire. And so I've used a lot of that energy now in this year's team building to have these as somewhat of domain captains. We'll have captains in Soak Sci or captains of science or mathematics. And then within that, our varsity, our scholastic, and our honors kids will that are returning vets will kind of lead that endeavor and keep those kids, plugged in and involved. So really from a team building standpoint, it hasn't really been front loaded and teacher led in the sense of, hey, let's all get together and tell two truths and a lie, or let's pull a rope, or let's pass a hula hoop. And those things might be effective, but what did develop over the course of that was just the natural studying, the sense of competition. We had a little Christmas gathering with some food. I'll bring in donuts once in a while and stuff, but it really was neat to see that kind of formation take place on the buses or in the cars as we're going to various competitions.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned scrimmages, because we haven't really talked about scrimmages much on this show yet. And I think you bring up a really good point here of how effective a scrimmage is in really coalescing the idea of what Acadec is for kids. Also, the element of a trip and that being fun and kind of a day of kind of it's weird that they're kind of team building in the middle of that competition, but there really is in that process. But it's just a really great way. And I always went to two. I would push for three, and I think there was one year I was able to squeeze in three, but usually two is the most you can do. But I think doing two is good. And how do you pick which one you go to, or what plays into that? Are you just looking for whatever's most with the schedule, or what goes into that?
Sure. I think first and foremost, Jared, proximity to our school, physical geography is an important part to keep just naturally costs down of travel. Fortunately for us, Morton Ranch is the first one on the block in October. I, at my previous school, worked with Kerry McDaniel closely in getting our teams to Morton. So we're familiar kind of with the Morton playbook. And it's good because those early invitationals, those early scrimmages are easy. So they aren't intimidating where a newbie is going to get in there and be overwhelmed by that experience and say, all right, I quit and shut down. They're challenged just enough to know that, hey, this is a flavor of what's going to happen as we go potentially to another scrimmage, in the following month. What we've tried to do, at least initially, is say, let's have one in October. We use part of that, and this might, parlay a little bit into your question, later on if we're discussing assessments. We're going to use some of the scores coming out of those scrimmages to start to kind of shore up who are kind of leading the pack in each of our divisions. And then we'll find something that's close by. We did the Dulles Invitational last year, which was a great experience. Dulles really put together a good program, had nice awards. We stayed on time, which was wonderfully important for us coaches. That we weren't having awards ceremonies at 5:30, 6 o'clock. You've probably been there as well, if we know.
Oh, yes.
And so that was a good competition. So we're looking at Friendswood heading down there. We did Pearland. We're going to look at Friendswood this year because a lot of our Katy 6A schools compete at the Friendswood tournament. We had a lot of our 5A schools because we were a medium school. Just as a little background, Paetow High School was a 5A medium school last year. We, like all the Katy ISD schools, have grown twofold. And so we've now advanced to the large school category. And so we're looking first at physical geography. Is it close enough where we could do a day trip? And number two, are we seeing a larger contingent of 6A schools that we're going to meet up against at the regional competition? It's great for us to put us up against my good friends, Jenny and Eric Brunzel over at Taylor High School, see how they're kind of performing. And then that data, when we come out of those various scrimmages and invitationals, will help to shape where we need to kind of plug, loose ends up, shore up the ship, so to speak, and find out where our weaknesses and Achilles heels are. Then Katy ISD right now, we're kind of floating around the idea of maybe having our own kind of internal district scrimmage, which might be fun to flush out. So Jonathan Frischman over at Jordan High School is kind of leading that and getting the Katy schools involved. Now that we've got 9 Katy schools doing Acadec, to see if we could do something a little bit more internally. Pearland was a great experience. We did Pearland, I think in December of last year is when the December Pearland. So we're really lucky that we've got like Dulles, Friendswood, Pearland, Morton Ranch, a lot of solid invitationals in our region that really give us what we're going to see going into our regional competition. Would I love the money to go up to North Texas or out to West Texas just to get kids for no other extrinsic purposes, just to have a weekend on the road? We all love those kind of experiences. But if we're not going to kind of match up with them at regionals, then this gives us at least a little bit stronger of a database and playbook to go into that regional competition in January. So that's kind of how we pick those in the future and coming up.
And there are quite a few options out there, and I think that's one of been the most interesting things over the last 6-7 years in Acadec in Texas is the number of scrimmages has grown by leaps and bounds. I want to say, back when I first started, there may have only been a couple, 2, 3. I know there was only like 1 or 2 in the North Texas area. I'm not quite sure about the South Texas area, but now there's probably, half a dozen in the North Texas area between October and first part of December. So everyone kind of has an option. Now you kind of touched on this a little bit here, but so now that as everyone kind of has a team, they get everybody. And by the way, you mentioned about kind of recruiting. August and September, I've found some really quality scholastics and even a varsity here and there kind of out of the nowhere in September and even once in October. So it's never too late to kind of start recruiting. But as you are recruiting and as you've got your team already there, how are you assessing them? What does that look like? What are you looking for? You mentioned scores from scrimmage. What else are you looking for as you kind of assess, how do I make this the final team?
What I really look for, and it might be, I'm going to do a super quick little easy answer. That's not my real answer. It'll make sense here in just a second. I mean, give them a whole lot of tests and whoever scores the highest makes the team, right? But that's in essence, if we are as true educators not relying solely on testing data on these practice tests that USAD gives us or Demi-Dec and stuff. Yeah, we could throw a litmus of tests at them and say, all right, who gets the highest gets to make the team. But we want to look a little deeper than that, because I found some students that are growing exponentially throughout the first few 9 weeks or so before the ramp up to Morton. Let me jump ahead and say we're not really picking the team till right after about the Thanksgiving break, maybe even a little bit closer towards the end of November. So we're doing a lot of assessments in class. We'll do small little ranking tests, these the combo quizzes that you'll get on Demi-Dec or through USAD. We'll look at in-class participation. Coach Escamilla and I have a small little spreadsheet where we're looking at kids that are engaged in the classroom. We might have a student that is really not scoring as high. Let's just throw numbers out and say student X got a 600 on this most recent ranking test and student Y got a 900, but student Y's attitude is a little bit disconnected. It's not engaging with the class. Student Y is also involved in orchestra, is an officer for NHS, and is at the Ag Barn till 5 o'clock in the morning and doesn't know whether or not they could make a potential regional run. So we're looking at a couple of things, because most of these kids, at least at the honors and scholastic level, are overachieving kids that are overcommitted in school. So that could be a little bit of a red flag for us and say, oh, well, where does your commitment lie? Is it in Acadec, or are you going to run off to UIL academics or speech and debate? So that plays into it as well. Attitude. We don't want sour grapes in the organization. And my young little Eleanor Pug is agreeing. We don't want sour grapes in the organization that kind of bring that different attitude down. Because as you know, as a former coach in Acadec, those kids that are always complaining about, we got an early arrival, we got another test tomorrow. You might be scoring high on that, but overall we're seeing a deficiency in morale and kids that are gravitating towards that kind of negative attitude. And so we're going to nip that in the bud pretty quickly and tell the kids the very beginning, as we're going through this ranking process, that the score is a very, very important aspect of that. At the end of the day, the medals that are getting put on their necks are based on one simple number, and that's 1,000 or less. But we want to build, in addition to that, a community. We want to build memories. We want them to take those memories beyond just their academic experience, because every decathlete that I've talked to, I don't care if they're coaches that are, I was in decathlon years ago, they talk about their experience they had and those trips and the meets that they had and the time in the classroom and the fun and the inside jokes and the music. I mean, last year's water theme with the glass harmonica, At the point we were having these, jokes about the glass harmonica music, or one year we did Africa and we had people were learning to play the drums and stuff. And so, yeah, you might not have some of the highest scores on that. That's going to be a big part of that. But we're looking for also how you engage the team. What is your attitude like? And how can we, in essence, capitalize upon that to help us improve? Lastly, we're looking for leadership, right? If you're going to step up, particularly our seniors and returning vets, are they leading small group discussions, and are they keeping those students accountable? That team placement is going to be super, super important.
Yeah, we actually talked about that in the last episode. How important is, if you're building a successful program, the kids have to have that leadership and to kind of take ownership of this program, that it cannot be a just continuously coach-driven thing. So developing that and looking for that is incredibly important. And I totally agree with you on the score issue. September scores are not always a real good indicator of what they're going to look like in December. Some kids,
Correct.
it clicks in October, and they need a while, especially if they're sophomores. It just, now if they've been in Acadec for 3 years, September's sometimes is most often a pretty good indicator of what's going to look like. But if they're brand new, you've got to give them at least a month, maybe 2, before how to study for Acadec clicks in, how to address those tests clicks in, for everything to click. And so there have been times where I've gotten really excited about a kid in September about what their scores were, but by the time November 1 hits around, I'm going, okay, no, that's not going to work. So it's you have to be very careful with just relying on the scores. But you're right, in the end, it's about scores, but not necessarily in August and September or October. It's November, December, January is where the scores kind of rule on those decisions. So.
And Jared, it also allows us, again, as they progress through the school year, marching band might take a toll on them. And I will see some of that fatigue happen where they're already burned out by November. And that's something that we have to account for as well. Yeah.
It usually hit about mid-October is when I had to kind of do something to shake them up, to get them kind of woke back up, to get them like re-energized some way, usually right before that scrimmage, which would usually help. But man, the studying that they got in August and September, it was amazing. By the 1st of October, you've got to kind of re-energize them in some way.
Absolutely. No, I was just going to say finally too, the thing that coaches also need to lean on, especially, are those returning vets. The kids that were competing last year were literally like asking me every other day, when is USAD going to drop? When are the demi-deck materials going to drop? And some of these newbies that are coming on board are like, why are you so excited that books are coming out over the summer? And boy, they got these like they were pouring into the latest New York Times bestseller, because they know they could have utilized that in retrospect. I could have utilized the summer to really have gained some ground, get those fundamentals out of the way, so I can then focus on the pure content going into the competition season.
Absolutely. Once they get a year under their belt, if you're even if you're not like hugely successful, if they catch the bug for Acadec, they've got it. And, awesome. And that is, you can't buy that kind of excitement. So,
yeah.
Well, thank you, Dax, for joining us today on the Acadec Coaches Playbook. And thanks to our listeners for joining us. Remember to follow all our social media accounts to stay up to date all year on the exciting world of Texas academic decathlon. If you have topics or questions you'd like answered, reach out to us through our accounts or email us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Dax.
Thank you, Joe.